Smile came out in 2022. It is the directorial debut of Parker Finn, who made a short film, I think with a different name, but that inspired this feature-length film that he made. You may be wondering, did I just wake up on a random day and decide to record a video about Smile? The answer is kind of yes. I mean, I rewatched the movie a couple days ago, and because I have fresh thoughts in my head, I wanted to talk about this one. Also, I think it's always noteworthy when you go into a film with rock-bottom expectations and come out with a completely different feeling. I mean, I watched the trailers for this back in early 22, and it looked like the most derivative schlock ever. Generic jump scare-filled horror movie that fills out that curse archetype. And I'd be lying if I told you that Truth or Dare from 2018 didn't kind of ruin Smiles for me in horror. That was the one where the characters are cursed and they have to either do a dare or speak some truth. Otherwise, they'll make a really dumb smile and trip and die and break their neck on something. It was horrible. And if I told you this is a movie that is about a curse that feeds on unresolved trauma, gets passed on through trauma, and exists as an allegory for mental illness and the feeling of being trapped inside your own head, you'd probably say, yeah, I've seen that about 1,000 times. That's not very original. And I certainly wouldn't call it original by any means. These curse horror films tend to follow a very similar formula. We've seen it with The Ring and It Follows, just to name a few of the really successful ones. Truth or Dare definitely falls into that category too, but it's an example of that going wrong. And in the case of something like Smile, there's the idea and then there's the execution. While the idea might be very derivative in this case, it's the execution that really stands out. And man, I walked out of this one a couple years ago shocked by how decent it was. And I was reminded of that fact the other day when I rewatched it. The first thing that makes this movie stand out is that the characters actually feel like characters. They're not just dumb teenagers who constantly make horrible decisions and exist solely to be fodder for this curse to pick them off one by one. We follow our main character, Rose, who is a therapist at a psychiatric ward in a hospital. And from the beginning, we see that there's something from her past that's brewing inside of her head, and we get fed more bits of information about that as the movie goes on. She's also played by Sosie Bacon, who is Kevin Bacon's daughter. I had no idea until after watching the movie and going over the cast list, but she's really good. Genuinely a great, strong performance for a lead in a horror film. I should have mentioned this before, but because this movie came out a few years ago, there will be spoilers in this video. So eventually we learn that the thing that is haunting her is her mother's suicide, and the fact that she didn't call for help when her mother did overdose and kind of, tried to turn to her daughter for help. But she was clearly young and fearful at the time, so you can't really judge her for that. And it's obvious that she's been avoiding dealing with this truly, which is why the curse in the film attaches itself to her so easily. And as Rose starts to become more and more paranoid, she starts to look more and more crazy, people start to believe her less. Even that sounds derivative as I say it out loud, but I don't know, man, this movie just executes it in a way that is so much better than most of the other films that exist in this subgenre. It does a really good job of portraying what it could feel like to be in this state of mental crisis and not really feel like anybody's truly listening to you or listening to the root cause of what your problem is. But the film even kind of subverts that trope of having none of the other characters believe the main character when things start going wrong. I mean, her fiancé certainly does fall into that trope. He's kind of an asshole, to be honest. But her ex-boyfriend, played by Kyle Gallner, very underrated actor as well, actually believes her and starts to further investigate her situation and try to help her, truly try to help her, not just say, I think you need help, I think you should talk to a therapist, He actually actively tries to help her with her problem and listens to her. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is jump scares. This movie does have quite a few jump scares. Some of them feel a bit cheap, while others are actually pretty good and built up to with pretty strong suspense. For instance, there's a scene where Rose is listening to an audio file, and there's a change in the sounds in the audio file. So it kind of trains your brain to be listening for the scare, when in actuality it's something that's standing right over her shoulder, so that was a nice surprise. But thankfully this isn't the kind of film where most of the jump scares are a wild animal coming out from behind a bush or something, something that isn't actually what it's being built up to be. No, the scares in this movie are legit. It is this thing messing with her because it feeds on her fear and her trauma. And I like how the characters try to come up with different ways to beat this curse For instance, Rose first realizes when she talks to an inmate in a prison that he was able to get rid of the curse by killing someone else in front of a witness. But ultimately, she deduces that this curse wants to be passed on and decides to go to her childhood home and be completely isolated from everyone so that way the curse can't be passed on. And when this thing reveals its true form, it's actually pretty unsettling. I have to praise the monster design in here. Very clever and unsettling. So many modern horror films are commentaries on trauma or grief or some kind of emotion in the human experience, usually a negative one. But filmmakers with skill can rework these ideas and give a strong execution of that simple idea, and I think that's what Parker Finn has done with this. I do have issues with it, so I'm going to just throw out some random ones that I was thinking about after watching it. First of all, the title card is really weird. It says Smile with flashing neon colors and a really loud, annoying soundtrack. The soundtrack in this is very unique. Sometimes that fits, sometimes it doesn't, but it's unique nonetheless. It has a grand total of 2 dream sequences. I'm not a fan of dream sequences, especially when we aren't clued in on the fact that we're watching a dream sequence at first. So it's kind of a gotcha moment, but a very cheap one. For instance, the scene where Rose goes to the hospital to stab one of the patients to death in order to pass on the curse. You're led to believe that it's actually happening, and then she just wakes up and she's back in her car. That felt very cheap to me. And they pull that off again at the end by giving you a false sense of security in that she defeated the demon, but actually everything that happened in the last 10 minutes didn't happen. It was just in her head. I don't like that trick. There are also some unexplained characteristics of the curse that I wish the movie would have delved into a little bit more. Like, did the demon thing kill the cat? Did Rose do it? Or was she possessed when she did it? It's never really explained, and we're not even clued into what happened. And I suppose it's a bit of a cliche to pull the bait and switch at the end and have the villain actually win, and it might kind of go against the film's message in the first place about, mental health awareness and listening to people who are in a situation of crisis. But I don't know, I'm just a sucker for horror films that have genuinely decent suspense, and I think Smile's one of them. I'm going to give this film 3.5 stars. I forgot to mention this, but we are getting Smile 2 later this year, so that's another reason to review this one in anticipation for that. Quite frankly, I don't have the highest of expectations for it just because it's a sequel to a movie that I don't think needs a sequel. This one's fine. It's not amazing. It's not terrible, but it certainly doesn't need to become a franchise. So those are my thoughts on Smile. Be sure to drop down into the comments and let me know what you think. While you're at it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.